John, giving us some backbone yet again. He's been through lots of things in this industry that we would not be thought of. My name's Philippa Campbell. I am introducing the session today. Our three panellists, I think you probably will figure out who they are: Diana, Keith, and Rob. We've got quite a lot of time this morning, so hopefully there'll be a lot of conversation in the whole room. A few clips to show. And what I'd like is each of the panelists is going to just make a short introduction. And then I'd like to get them talking together so that in the spirit of Keith's conversation yesterday, we get a bit juicy from here and then throw it open. And just sort of inspired by yesterday and by Ted Hope, I thought this session might also be a chance for us as a group to not just think about adaptation and knock some ideas around about that in terms of turning material into written material and screen material, but also how we might be adapting ourselves as makers of culture. Any ideas or provocations that people have been sitting on overnight that have come through. I thought this was an opportunity for us to go a little bit broader in the session, as towards the end of the session. So just put that in mind as we go through. So first off, I'd like to ask Rob to talk. About just to present about first thoughts.
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a rank amateur on this adaptation thing because I hadn't really done it before, except briefly trying and failing with John many a decade ago on a well-known project. I just finished the film called Two Little Boys, which was technically was an adaptation of my brother's book called Two Little Boys, which technically was an adaptation of a screenplay idea. Before that, a little known fact. So I think when I came to the beginning of the process of adapting Duncan's book, I basically read a draft of the first draft of his book and went, great, it's a film, I could really see the film. And I think somewhat naively then just went through a process of, well, let's just adapt it into a screenplay now. And we actually ignored the first half of the screenplay that had previously written that had inspired the book. In fact, there was a lot of prose attached to the original writing process anyway, which is why the book happened. And what I didn't do initially was really understand, I think, the differences between the mediums. I mean, other than on a very sort of surface level, of course, they're two different mediums. I did understand that there were particular challenges in this book, probably as in most books, but this book was a dual perspective. Basically, two characters, and each chapter was alternating between each character's point of view. Right. So clearly, and all interior monologue. Right. So clearly that was going to lead to challenges in creating a film of it, because unless you want to have a absolutely voiceover-laden film, you we're going to have to find ways to, I guess, depict the essence of those dual perspectives without literally getting into people's heads. And what happened throughout the drafting process, in fact, at the start we just went, let's make a film with lots of voiceover. Why we don't have voiceover in films, so this voiceover is really beautifully written. It's lovely, and the voice, and the thing with the voiceover in the story was that what the characters were doing was always very different from the sometimes quite always very different from the thoughts that they were having. And that's where a lot of the comedy sort of sat. And what we discovered as we were and I think this is probably a common problem to a lot of adaptation, because of the nature of the interior monologue novel, whether it's dual perspective or not, and a film where you sit outside of people's heads in order to see what they do, which takes you inside of their experience. So I guess I came to appreciate that through the drafting process, where we realised that, well, actually, yes, sure. So we embraced it in our first draft. We basically just sort of literally adapted it, and very fast, in 3 weeks, we had the book down into a screenplay form. Which was actually a great process, because it meant that, right, here it is. Now, what have we got? What are the problems? And clearly, one of the greatest problems was that, weirdly, we weren't getting into these characters' heads, despite all the voiceover. In fact, we very quickly realised that the voiceover was the thing that was stopping us from doing that, right? And gradually, through the drafting process, we pulled out the voiceover, not all of it, but most of it. And then through the editing process, we pulled out even more. So it was for me, there were a lot of sort of lessons learned. The other lessons for pass on that was, again, I sort of feel quite, I've been doing this for a while, so I learned a lot. Was I think the expectations of an audience are very different between a film and a novel. The film, and to give you an example, the novel of Two Little Boys, but one of the reasons I wanted to make it as a film actually was because it's a deliciously black ending. It was just lovely. There's a character that started trapped at the start of the film, goes through a process of sort of becoming, to some extent, a bit of a man, or kind of growing up a little bit, and then in the novel, he ends up even more trapped at the end than he was at the beginning, right? So, delicious, especially if you're kind of like blackness and, and I was very committed to kind of making sure that that very black ending found its way to the screen, no matter what anyone said, right? The distributor did raise some concerns. But most people just sort of went with us because, force of personality and all that. But, which can be a problem. And then I realised through the process of really the cut, actually, that it can be, at least for a comedy anyway, it was a very frustrating journey for an audience, right? To lead them on a path, almost get there, and then send them off at the end going, oh, fuck. Whereas in a book, you can kind of go, oh, fuck. And because you know what's going on inside the head of that character, it's delicious. So, we did we did a couple of days pickups and sort of it wasn't a massive change at the end, but it was a change in the feeling of the end of the film to make it more of a satisfying filmic journey. So I guess I learnt that there's but they're different mediums with different demands, and ultimately, of course, trying to capture the essence of what you loved about that book and put it on the screen is what I think we're really doing and probably talking about today.
Thank you.
Hi. Yeah. I'm a writer and a script editor. That's mostly what I do. My kind of journey with adaptation. I wrote a movie called Clubland, which I think was shown here, and that was shown at Sundance in 2007. And in the way these things happen, that meant that I was hot for about 7.5 minutes as a result of the movie. And so I got a Hollywood agent briefly. And that was a learning experience for me, because I thought, having written a movie, I thought, well, I know a bit about these things. I expect what will happen is, in my fantasy, people will approach me and want me to write variations of Clubland. I thought, well, that's good, I can do that. They didn't want that at all. What everybody in that American context wanted was an adaptation of something that already existed. It didn't matter whether it was a book, a blog, a magazine article, anything, so long as it had been pre-loved by an audience, because then they would say there's an affection for this story. And so that was a really interesting lesson. And so, you know, spec scripts and original scripts didn't seem to be on the horizon. It was always, you know, Hollywood being Hollywood, they wanted that guarantee almost that if this project became a movie, there was already an audience for it because it had been a book, or even a magazine article. If they knew that the magazine article online had so many hits, then that was a possible audience for them. So the first job I got out of that was doing an adaptation of, it was an American agent got me the job, but it was actually an English company. It was working title was working with Ruby Films in a kind of co-production. And that was of a Marion Keyes book. Marion Keyes is an Irish kind of chick lit writer, real.
Airport.
Sorry?
Airport.
Airport books, very, very funny. They're wonderfully funny novels. And I wasn't the first writer attached. You know, you should know when you see those movies and there's a credit list of about 6 people, it doesn't mean that 6 people have sat down in a room and written the thing together. It means there was a sequence of 6 writers and there's been an arbitration to see, you know, who gets what on the screen. And I think I was the 3rd writer on that one. And they're very polite. They give you the 2 previous drafts, so I had a look at what everybody else had a go at. They were interested in me doing that because they wanted to use Cherie Nolan, who had been the director of Clubland, and they thought that the 2 of us could have a go at that. So we had a go at that book. That was a really interesting experience. It was kind of a working title production, and so, you know, we knew it had to have that kind of Richard Curtis, you know, if it could, Richard Curtis working title, kind of romantic comedy.
What was the name of the book?
Sorry, it was Rachel's Holiday. Rachel's Holiday. And we worked on that for about 18 months. I can go into detail later, but just as part of this opening spiel. We worked on that for about 18 months. And then a Jonathan Demme movie called Rachel's Getting Married came out, which is much the same sort of story. So, you know, everything stopped. Possibly forever, but maybe not. You know, that's the way things happen. But out of that relationship, I got another job with the Ruby half of that co-production. Ruby is a production company in London. And they sent me Marina Lewicki's book, Short History of Tractors in Ukrainian. And Marina has a New Zealand connection. I think her husband is a New Zealand guy. Yeah. And that had at least one other writer, and they sent me that script as well. That was a different sort of relationship. I mean, Marina's story is a kind of a fairy story, really, because she's, you know, she's an older writer. I think she told me that she'd written 14 or so novels that had never been published. Tractors was the first book that her first novel to be published, and it sold 1 million copies in England alone. It just became instantly one of those modern classics. And, you know, even though, you know, the Marion Keyes books are really popular, I just had the sense doing the adaptation of Marina's book that there is a proprietorial ownership in that readership. If 1 million people have read that book and loved it, you better not mess around too much with it. You know, given all of the things that you're saying about the difference between the 2 forms, which we can talk about later. So that became, and Marina, I never met Marion Keyes at all. I heard that they'd shown her Clubland and she liked that. But I eventually had quite a kind of close relationship with Marina. We would talk on Skype quite a bit, and I actually met her a couple of times. That doesn't always happen with adaptations. Often some writers I know, you try to keep a distance from the original work because, you know, often they don't want to be involved. You know, they're just desperate for the movie to be made because on the first day of photography you get this wonderful check. So do what you have to do to get me paid. But Marina, because it was her first novel and because there's a kind of autobiographical element, you know, that was a much more kind of interesting and closer relationship. So we can talk about that a bit later on as well. And then there's the Sapphires, which we have a clip from. That was a different relationship again because I co-wrote that with Tony. It's the story of 4 Aboriginal girls in the 60s who began, you know, were living on a mission and were kind of headhunted by a talent scout and ended up touring Vietnam as singers entertaining the black American troops. And the story, while we've fictionalised elements of it for the movie, the story is based in truth because Tony, the co-writer, his mum was one of the girls that went to Vietnam as a singer. You know, extraordinary story. So Tony had written this as a stage play. I'd known Tony beforehand and I'd worked as his script editor on some other projects that he had. And he was telling me about Sapphires before, as I said, before he wrote any part of it, and I just loved the idea. So I stayed very close to Tony in the hope that, you know, I could come on board as writing the adaptation of the stage play, which we did, but co-writing it with the writer of the original source material was a different experience again. I mean, it's like the journey I've had with these adaptations is from distant to kind of half a relationship to a kind of fully fledged collaboration with the original source material. And because we knew that it was going to be a movie and the canvas of a movie was so much bigger than what Tony had been able to do in his stage play, we sort of said, well, let's start again. We know the premise of the story. We know there's some fantastic gags in the stage play, and we'll find a home for those. But because, you know, it was Tony, because his mum and his aunties, the original Sapphires, were on tap, we sort of said, well, let's start again. Let's keep the premise, but let's start the process again. And yeah, we can talk about that as well. But if we...
Shall we see a little bit of the Sapphires now?
Yeah. We can have a look. This is the scene we're going to have a look at is in the course of the movie, the girls have encountered this kind of drunken Irish guy who's running talent contests at a pub. They've approached him and said, you know, we need a piano player, we want to go to Vietnam. He's not very interested until he realises there's money involved and he might be able to make a bit of money. So this clip we're going to look at is, it's actually 2 clips, but it's all part of the one scene. So it'll just be a short bit and then there's a little bit missing from the scene and then it continues. So this is, you know, in a musical story, you always need that obligatory rehearsal scene. So this is the scene of them getting together.
And was this scene in the play?
No.
Right.
No, this is a new one.
All right, let's go again. Great fun. This time, Julie, can you sing the lead, please?
What? No. I'm Gail.
That's right.
Yeah, my name's Gail. I sing lead, Julie, and the girls do backups.
How do you feel about not singing lead?
How do you feel about getting knocked out by a woman?
Before we go again, girls, when I met you, you were doing your whole country and western thing, and that's fine. We all make mistakes. But here's where we learn from that mistake. Country and western music is about loss. Soul music is also about loss. But the difference is, in country and western music, they've lost, they've given up, and they're just at home whining about it. In soul music, they're struggling to get it back, and they haven't given up. So every note that passes through your lips should have the tone of a woman who's grasping and fighting and desperate to retrieve what's been taken. You understand? And what it is that you're searching for, that's up to you. I'm just here to get you there, you know? I'll take you there. There's a place called the Apollo Theater. It's where dreams are made, where legends are born. I'll take you there. I can see you girls singing in places like that. There in the Rainbow, in the Olympia, the best rooms in the world.
I'll take you there.
Because you've got it within you, you just need to let it out.
I'll take you there.
That's it, let it out of you like a geyser coming out of the ground, like a volcano spraying from the earth. You just can't stop it.
I'll take you there.
Like a volcano pushing through the earth beneath you.
I'll take you there.
Until finally it's easy enough like breathing in and breathing out and breathing in and breathing out and breathing in and breathing in and breathing in. Oh, oh, can I have some mercy now? Any questions?
That's me.
Okay. I think working well, not mostly, a few things that I've made, they are most of them adaptations. I don't follow any specific structure, but just trying to find in the story what makes sense to me, what holds my blood, and I just do the story, my story, as much as I can. I try to honor the author in terms of the place where he is as a writer. I deeply enjoy the form of novel and short story. I'm a good reader and I love reading, and I do respect the boundaries and the differences in both languages. And having that respect, once I have the opportunity to adapt a story, I do find for myself the same space. I do make it mine, and always, of course, having the permission of the author. It's not just giving away the rights of a story, but allowing, I always ask personally if I'm allowed to make a story mine as much as I want and as far as I want. I've been very, very privileged to have always, when I had those chances, the opportunity not to have constraints nor limitations from my producers, in this case, the last film that I made with John Barnett, and previously as well. So I've been able to borrow the wave of somebody else's and jump on my surf and go wherever I want. And I've been, in beautiful places. I fell, it has happened, all kinds of different things. But I do try to take over and make mine, absolutely mine, the story. And once that happens, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to find from where I can work. And once that has happened, I do really give myself the space to change characters, the function, maybe more than anything else, the function of the characters. And I try, the process that I go through is that I try to fish or to pick up the seeds that have been left by the author on the terrain. Maybe they are not fully developed and they are not the main source of the narrative. I do try to pick up the seeds that are already there and I grow them. And from that, I create the territory, the landscape, where I feel comfortable in somebody else's story. And it's a process that I absolutely love. It makes me feel less autistic, how would you say that? When I can find in somebody else's story something that makes sense to me and that ignites my passions, I feel less lonely. And I feel that then whatever happens within myself may have a resonance in the audience. Because if it rang a bell in my heart, it probably will ring a bell in somebody else's heart. So it's somehow like the tough job may be done by the author. And and it's something that I truly, truly enjoy, and I love the spirit and the freedom
that I can get by knitting through somebody else's universe. It's something that I enjoy that I've been able to do. And from my very, very personal perspective, that is what is fascinating about adapting. It's not necessarily like the recreation on the screen of something that has been described on paper, but like a revisitation and revision of a universe that already exists. And I just travel through it, and I bring back my memories from that journey. And it's like I'm reading to everybody else the way I read the story. And I share my way of reading a story, knowing that once people go and read the original source, they will see a different story from what I saw. And that difference is what I embrace.
I think that difference is really interesting, and we should get, I'd love you to talk about that difference a bit more. But just before we get there, the relationship with the original writer, or touched on, Jonathan's brother. You talked about 3 different kinds of relationships. It would be really interesting to hear briefly any thoughts about building that relationship, or key things in that relationship that you observed or you discovered in your most recent experiences or most significant experiences, I suppose, because this is what, as adapters, we will, maybe it's all very well picking up a piece of paper, but as we heard from Ben yesterday, you meet the people behind the piece of paper. How's that been for you? What's been enjoyable about that, I suppose, to write? Because there's always a bit of fear involved in it as well, I imagine. Wanting that relationship to be fruitful.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I say, my experience is that it's been a really different relationship, everything that I've done. And for a kids' TV show, I also did an adaptation of some Tim Whitten kids' books. And there were 3 very thin Lockie Leonard series of books. And we had to turn those into 52 half hours, so we had to elaborate. And he didn't mind what we did, he was just more into this, about a kid that goes surfing, and so Tim was much more interested in how we shot the surfing. But look, it's hard to generalize on that, because all of those relationships I've had feel as though they've been very, very different. But well, you were talking, I was thinking, well, it's different for me being the adapter and not the director, because that's a different stage of the process. Because, I think what I was doing, because there were directors attached, there was a director attached to the Sapphires, but there wasn't directors attached to the first 2 adaptations that I did. And so I felt that was less about my creative journey into the movie and more about finding what the essence of the book was. I think that every book has its own character, and I think it's that character that the book has that is the relationship between the audience, the reader, and the book. And so for me, it was trying to capture the essence of what that, of the character of the original book was. And I'm thinking of Tractors in particular now, because while, as I said before, that had such a big readership that I didn't want to mess with it, because then people feel that they're ripped off if their relationship with that book is not replicated somehow. But Marina gave her a kind of nod of approval to the changes I made, because her words, she was saying, well, you're keeping the essence of the flavour of the thing.
And can you, without those of us who haven't read the book, is there anything you could just quickly talk about in terms of the change between?
Yeah, look, it's the story of a Ukrainian family, an old an old Ukrainian guy who's been living in England since he was kind of refugee post-war, has brought up two English daughters, really. One is a kind of left-wing liberal daughter, the other is a kind of proto-Thatcherite daughter. They kind of hate each other, their values are absolutely opposed. But then when their mother dies, the old man, the old guy who's in his 80s, is seduced by a young Ukrainian bombshell in her 30s who wants to have residency in England and persuades the guy to marry her. And so these two sisters that hate each other have to unite to take on the common foe, and in doing so rediscover the kind of Ukrainian aspects of their character in terms of soulfulness and passion, and you realise that their kind of English cultural veneer is kind of quite thin. But just literal things. There's a couple of things. That was a first-person narrative, and often in first-person books, I mean, Great Gatsby is the great example. You know, Nick is the narrator in that, but he's not the lead character. In adaptations, often the narrator is less finely drawn than the characters that they meet. You know, the characters that the narrator leads you to have a sharper definition than the narrator. But in Tractors, the narrator had to be the central character. And that was really interesting because a lot of her comments, she was relatively a kind of an inhibited character, and a lot of her commentary was inside her head, and somehow we had to find a characterization from her that was less the kind of observer on the situation and more a player. So the changes were to make her slightly more active and to make the conflict with her sister more active. So the sisters in the book, I don't think ever are in the father's house with the bombshell. I don't think they're ever in the father's house at the same time. But the dramatic appeal of having these two conflicting sisters together, you know, with the father was just too much to resist. So that was the sort of changes, yeah.
One of the things that struck me in your session yesterday, which I really loved, was when you talked about the characters' delusions.
Which I sort of thought a little bit about when you were talking about your ending, Rob, Two Little Boys, that the delicious darkness of the ending might have something to do with the characters' delusions in some way or another. Anyway, that's another conversation. But did you, Keith, go searching for the delusional elements as a dramatic writer inside prose? Is that part of? Yeah, I did because Nadia, her name is the narrative character.
And she's one of the daughters.
She's one of the daughters.
And is she the left-wing one, or the?
She's the left-wing,
right.
wishy-washy liberal. She calls herself. She's a wishy-washy liberal.
And is she the one that is the closest to Marina? Because you said there was some.
I think so.
biographical-
Yeah. Yes, there was. And actually, just as a digression, that was part of the issue of the adaptation, because Marina was aware that this was quite an autobiographical story, and somehow in a novel that wasn't quite as acute an issue for her as maybe seeing it all up on the film. So we had to, you know, steer through some of her kind of concerns. But yeah, no, I did look for those kind of contradictions, because, as I say, the character was kind of, I suppose, passive-aggressive, you know, which is a great characterisation to have, but it also has to be an active characterisation, and so that I had to look for those kind of things. But just before it goes out of my head, I mean, just in terms of my method with that, and with all the books I've done, my starting point is to actually go through the book and précis every chapter of the book, you know, so, and that's pretty much as a reference for me, so I know, because I figure that original author has explored many of the storytelling issues that you're going to face, so you might as well take a week and go through the process of working out how they figured out how to tell the story and get to understand their choices. They might not be the choices you need, but it's a really useful first base for me, and it also gets the book into my head. So that's always my starting point, is to start with a real kind of faithful sort of connection to the story and say, this is what happens in every part of every chapter, and then, you know, start working with my Tracy rather than the original book. Sorry, that was a
No, that's really interesting. Robert?
Well, I think starting points are quite an interesting topic in a way, because my starting point for, Out of the Blue, which was, was an adaptation, wasn't really an adaptation, but it was based on a book originally, and it was the book the producer gave me the book to read, and then I came up and had a meeting and sort of presented what I thought a film of that book could be, and I think my starting point is always to have a kind of strong sort of feeling for what this is, if you absolutely just love the book and want to capture that, or in the case of Out of the Blue, what you felt it could be, because I didn't absolutely love the book. I saw there was an incredibly compelling story in the material, but actually the book told a story about cops, which I think is what attracted the producer, actually. What I saw was a story in there about community, with cops as part of a community. And I saw that very strongly, and that's what I came and did the meeting and said, I want to tell a story about community. I based it on this material. And I think once you've got that, I suppose you might call it an anchoring vision, as long as it's drawn from the material, or at least from your response to the material, you've always got something to go back to. You don't. It means that when you do get lost, and of course we do get lost. We will get lost. It's an inevitability, even when we're. In fact, it's probably easier not to get lost in a way when it's found material, because you've got something to go back to. But you still get lost. And when that happens, you can go back to, well, what is the essence of this thing that inspired me in the first place? You can go, and I found that idea of telling a story about community was able to infuse the entire project through. Clearly in the writing, because it meant that we were able to take an attitude on how to tell that cop story in a non-police procedural copy sort of way, right? Now, I don't think we would have just come up with that had we just gone, let's translate this. I think it's got to start with, what sort of thing are we trying to make? What is that sort of central kind of thing? And so for me, my starting process is always to write, to have a response and write it down. And then you can change it later. But if it's there and you truly believe in it and you're passionate enough about that to then want to kind of go forward with the project, you'll always come back to it. Yeah.
I remember hearing that you and Graham, your co-writer, went and stayed in the community. We spent some time there at the very beginning of the process.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's relevant so much here for adaptation, because that was part of figuring out a story. But yeah. I guess more than adapting a book, we were adapting an event.
Yeah.
Philippa, can I just make the observation? Yeah. Rob said that he really only started out by saying he'd done one adaptation, but he's done 3. Because Sarkies, in a sense, is about a story. It's about a community that you know, and you've taken something from it. And I think Out of the Blue and Sarkies are both adaptations of material. So it isn't just a book that you start with.
I think it's a little. Sarkies was an original story that I'd had that I presented to Duncan as here's a. And it felt like it could be a good low-budget film as a potential first film.
But it's inside a world that you...
But it's... I've just been dealing with this actually over the last couple of weeks. Duncan and I have been working on trying to figure out, work on the next, what might be our next project, and we've been working for months actually on an original story, right? And I like the idea, something within me that loves the idea of making original stories. I think there has to be originators in this world, and I completely understand why producers in particular like to, and directors too, like to lock into, oh, here's a book I love. I can totally understand that. But, you know, it's good to have original stuff as well. And what we find when we worked on this original story is that film is so dense, it requires such a huge kind of understanding of the story and the characters and everything that in the sort of time that you get, if you're going to be funded to write an original story, it's very hard to get that sort of depth on the page in a very satisfying way, even in a first draft. You know, like you know it's going to go through drafts. And so we've gone back and we've gone, I'm not so sure. And while we were making Two Little Boys, Duncan wrote another book based on an idea of mine, and we're now currently adapting that book, you know, and finding and loving the process of, I guess, going from something that is very rich, you know, in this case 600 pages worth of richness, and pairing that, well, I guess this is the process, isn't it? Sort of paring that down to an essence that still reflects the richness. I think that's the challenge, and it's a huge challenge. But I think I'm not so sure that I'll want to work on original material again, because I've loved being inspired by, in this case so far, mostly my brother's work. It doesn't have to be that, but there's something about that richness as a starting point.
Dan, Medicine Woman is a novella.
Yeah.
So it's not the 600 pages,
No, it is, of course, a shorter material in terms of pages, but the richness of elements that Witty placed in that story, even as I was saying before, some of them not fully developed, but just seeded, is extensive. It's really, really very, very rich. There was a very interesting moment in which one of the characters, in the original story, there is one character that holds the full extent of the conflict, and it's locked inside of her. And again, going to what you were saying, well, there is no way for us to jump into the brain of the character and tell them what is happening. And the fact that the conflict was sitting only with her was putting her in a very, very negative light. Right? And I remember that I went to John Barnett and I told him, sorry, I don't like this woman. I think that we should just take her out of the story. Easy. And John told me, no. She's the holder of the conflict, so find a way. And I thank him for that, because finally that character holds the soul of the film. Although she's not the protagonist, and she was never thought as the protagonist, the character really became the holder of the story. And what happened, what in that sense was my resource to sort out her negativity that I couldn't relate to, plus the fact that only she was holding the character, and the conflict and the other two were very passive, just reacting to her, is that I divided the functions of the inner conflict of this woman, and I lent it, half of it, to her mother.
Right.
So,
it's a question of function, I want to
yes. And for me, that was, again, I was honoring the conflict that Witty brings on the page, and my way of dealing it, and going through the alchemy again of how I processed that conflict was dividing it and choosing from my other two characters who would be the antagonist to the original conflict. And that brought a lot of dynamic to the storytelling, and it made it almost like a thriller, like a psychological thriller. So the ghost, the darkest side of the original character in Witty, became another character. And so it was quite, it was a short piece in terms of pages from what Witty wrote, but extremely, extremely rich. He goes to so many places that, we could make the sequel, the Return of Medicine Woman.
That's the thing in New Zealand.
yeah. But you know, there is a lot of riches, and for me it was a question of choosing from all the elements that Whitney places on his piece, which were the parts that were important for me to deal with. And some others are in the beautiful novella that you wrote, and they remain there for the readers. And I just picked some of them and translated them and reinterpret them as, to the film.
Yeah. Just going back to the sort of, we're talking a lot about prose, and you will have a chance to ask questions in just a minute. One more question from me. You know, reading in a book, and even a magazine article to a degree, but certainly a novella or short story or a novel, is a very intimate experience. You know, people literally take books to bed with them. You know, it's a kind of quasi-sexual experience. Proto-sexual, I know. But you know, in particular, we're talking about cinema. We're talking about our work on that big screen. Which is a different physical experience. You're with other people. You're not in your bedroom, or under a tree in the garden, or in the park. You're in a public place. So a story is kind of witnessed in a different way. In your experience as people, filmmakers working in adaptation, how has that been for you? And a little bit about your treasure. The treasure of that you get at the end of the novel is different from the one you have at the end of the film when you walk out. How is going from that intimacy into that public place, but still requiring that direct connection with your audience?
Still intimate though. I mean, it's private and public, isn't it? The cinema experience. I not acknowledge it's a different experience. I get what you mean, but it's when you're in a film, you're not sitting with. It's almost bizarre that we go to date movies because you're not actually with your date. You're sitting beside them. Well, no, you're not. The point is, actually, it's Ted's thing. The point of it is the conversation you have with your date afterwards. So you're sharing, but you're sharing an incredibly individual experience, right? You're relating to these characters, or and they're your version. Even obviously in a book, they're your version of the character.
Yeah.
Actually, in a film, I think they're your version of the character as well.
Yeah.
A little bit more directed because you're seeing a face, but if the film's working, you are actually experiencing the emotions of that main character. In that way, for me, it's not.
Intimacy
so
is
different.
actually totally rooted in the experience of the audience anyway.
At a very basic level, I think it is.
I think, that for me becomes like a collective intimacy experience. Because you are there connected to the story, and at the same time you have a lot of people when it's all people don't go to the cinema anymore, but you have the thing, you have the breath of the rest of the people reacting, laughing, crying. It becomes a collective experience of intimacy that it's quite unique, and that's what is the magical part of going to the cinema.
I agree. I think it's very intimate being in, you're in the dark for one thing, they turn all the lights off and you have this kind of relationship. Here's what I was trying to say yesterday, you get inside the heads, it's exactly what you're saying, you get inside the heads of the character, and that's a very kind of intimate space to be, and it is important being in the dark. It's a little suspicion I have. Every script I write, the first words I write in every script are out of the darkness, because it comes up out of the dark. I always cross it out, it never lasts, but it's my little thing, because, movies and stories come from the same places where your dreams come from. That's something that happens in the dark,
That's really lovely.
Yeah, that's where that place is,
Because what I think is interesting about characters is that we project ourselves onto the character. You know what it's like when you go to a film that you really love, and you find yourself say it was a kind of a hero kind of character, and it's a guy, you walk out of this, everyone's been here seen Reservoir Dogs, and you couldn't help back in the day and walk out of Reservoir Dogs and have a certain sort of, and it lasts for 10, 15 minutes. But that's projecting yourself onto that character. You become that character, and I love that.
Any questions? Yeah.
Could I just raise the question that you put at the start of the session about perhaps opening up that question of adapting themselves as makers of culture? And just thinking, Dana, of your very different and specific film sensibility coming from Mexico and coming out of film school there, and just how much that experience sort of formed your way of working and approaching film, because I suspect that it's quite a different approach than many of us here take, and just how much of that perhaps you've adapted or kept in your journey from Mexico to New Zealand, specifically as a writer.
I guess that's something that is already in the system of all of us, right? We just breathe and we are nurtured by what surrounds us culturally and in terms of the family experiences that we have, the religious upbringing or not. All those things happen to all of us, no matter where we live. And yes, of course, I've been fed by the intensity that belongs to my culture. You know, we love intensity and we get drunk and we scream and, we do are quite loud in an emotional way. And that's something that I cannot wash away from myself. I learned to know that I don't want to wash it away. And that's part of me. And sometimes it's a good quality and sometimes it's devastating. I remember when we were shooting the film, there were people who couldn't understand what was going on with me because I would jump from, oh fuck, this is a disaster, and 2 seconds later I would say, wow. And that intensity was not fitting with the intensity of New Zealand. And it was clashing, and I could feel it, that people were saying, oh my God, how is this crazy woman? And that comes from, I'm sure that that's part of how the intensive emotional journey that imposed on my characters. I have to say that what was easy for me was to find a lot of that intensity in the Maori culture. It was really so easy for me to relate to that identity because it's almost, funny enough, it's almost sister with something that is strongly Mexican. And I have the Jewish strong upbringing as well. And the storytelling, the way of storytelling that I read when I was a little girl in school through the Old Testament brings epic dimensions to my little stories. They are little intimate stories of people in their little dramas. And what it's in my system of storytelling comes from that, God, punishment. It's part of who I am, and it's just the cultural material that I don't know if that is an answer or not.
It's a good opening up of the territory.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a broader sense of adaptation as well in as much as it relates to the sapphires, because Chris O'Dowd, who plays the music guy there in the clip that you saw, was fairly late casting. I mean, we had the 4 Aboriginal women, very early on, and Deb Manham was always going to be part of the mix. But Chris came very late, and that meant that Tony Briggs, the co-writer, we had to sort of adapt the role to Chris.
Right, so was he originally Irish?
No, he wasn't. We knew, film financing being what it was, and that it was a story about 4 Aboriginal girls, that there wouldn't be kind of star casting attached to that. In the original stage play, it was an Australian character, so we knew that, one of the pragmatic decisions we had to make was that needed to be an overseas casting. We wrote that character as English originally, but then, as you go through all the casting convolutions, that there were some American guys came into the mix, which is a bit scary, thinking how we would adapt that character. But then Chris came on board. And, this is just late stage adaptation that you do with the screenplay. Chris came on board and he was really good. He had some quite kind of heavy duty notes for us. He was just coming off Bridesmaids, and that was scary because once we knew we had him cast, he gave us some quite strong notes. He wanted the character not to be too amiable. I think the English guy we'd written had been a kind of amiable English guy. It was the same character arc and the same journey, but the character was a little more amiable. And Chris said to us, I'm an amiable actor. I mean, that's what I come across on screen as being very amiable. And if you write an amiable role, it's going to be a double kind of negative. So he was very keen on giving the character more edge and being a darker character, or in his words, he said, make him more of a scoundrel. And so we had to take that on board. And the scary part was that Bridesmaid had just opened, so we got all of these notes. It was whether we could do it was dependent on whether he would come on board the movie. So I went to see Bridesmaid and thought, oh my God, I've got to write a funny scoundrel for this guy who's so fantastic. It was a really scary proposition. But we kind of did that, and I channeled all of those Marianne Keyes books I'd been reading, to try and sound authentically Irish, so he'd be impressed by that. And we sort of got away with it, but there's something that's so fluid about the nature of filmmaking that every part of filmmaking is an adaptation. You're adapting to the light on the day, or you're adapting to the set, or what happens. So it's a continual kind of adaptation, isn't it, making movies. But it was interesting for me that, very late in the day we were adapting the script to the kind of particular requirements of the actor, and thank God we did, because I think he's fantastic in the film, and it gives it some of its kind of character and heart, but it was a very late stage in the process.
And you were in order to get the actor that everybody wanted, you had to slightly rethink the tone of your story. But he was right, That's interesting,
he was absolutely right, and I'm so pleased, he made that decision, and we did it. We failed the audition once. We sort of thought we could get away with just by sending him notes saying what the character is, so we sent him some notes back for his notes. He said, no, that's not it.
See it.
Yeah, he wanted to see it, so then we had to actually go down and rewrite the early scenes with a bit more mongrel of them, so that, and then and he was right, in the course of the movie you come to love that character, and he is amiable by the end, but, the sense of journey is stronger. And he said it was because after Bridesmaids he was getting lots and lots of romantic comedy offers, and he didn't want to go into that territory, he didn't want to be known for that, so he just wanted something that would be challenging for him. So, as I say, that's kind of late stage adaptation process. But it was interesting.
Are you guys able to cite a specific, very tangible difference between the source medium and the film medium that you created it into, and give a specific example of how a moment or a scene changed because of the different nature of the medium?
Sapphire's stage play was, the character of that was you had the band on stage all of the way through, and yes, they went to Vietnam, but only in your imagination, because you were sitting in a theatre with a band on the stage. And one of the issues we faced with Sapphires is the canvas of it was so great that we could, and we did, we took, the cast went to Vietnam, we could put them into helicopters, we could have firefights and all of that. And yes, there were tragic moments in the movie, but 10 minutes after the tragic moment, the actor runs out on stage and sings a song, you know, so he's not really dead. But in a movie, because they're more literal, you kill someone and they stay dead. Or, no, usually. And so we had to make choices of how to honour the kind of grotesque kind of horror of war within a story that was always supposed to be light and funny, knowing that the first time someone got shot or the first time there was blood would change the character of the piece in a way that it isn't changed by being on stage when the band is always there and you're working with a different part of your imagination. Do you know what I mean? That was a different sort of challenge for it. Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Rob, I was wondering if you might be able to talk about out of the blue, how you managed to stay true to the real events of what happened, but still adapt it to a cinematic narrative, and that process.
Well, I think maybe this is where, I guess, choice of material is either your friend or your enemy. And what Graham and I discovered very early on when we started thinking about how to structure this material, because the book is just sort of just tells the story, you know, right from, you know, many years ago you learn about David Gray's family and a lot about the community. I guess once we realised